Most people are not living at even a fraction of their potential. Not because they lack ambition, not because they lack vision, but because they're waiting. Waiting for a guarantee, waiting for certainty, waiting until they feel safe enough to make a move. And in that waiting, life passes. Opportunities disappear. Potential is wasted. Not because the doors were locked, but because they never walked through them. The fear isn't always loud. It's not always panic or paralysis. Sometimes it shows up as hesitation. Sometimes it hides behind logic. It wears the mask of responsibility, caution, strategy. But beneath the mask is the same emotion. Fear of risk. Fear of what could go wrong. Fear of what others might say. Fear of failure. Fear of judgment. Fear of loss. People convince themselves they're being smart, being calculated, being wise. But really, they're being passive. They're letting fear run the show. They tell themselves they're being realistic. But it's not realism. It's protection. It's the mind doing everything it can to avoid exposure, avoid embarrassment, avoid pain. But here's the truth. No one builds anything worthwhile without risk. No one creates something great while playing it safe. There is no path to growth that doesn't run directly through uncertainty. If you want to win, you have to get used to losing, because risk doesn't mean recklessness. Risk means you're doing something that has a chance to change your life. Most people only take action when the cost of inaction finally becomes greater than the fear of taking a risk. They wait until the pain of staying the same is louder than the discomfort of change. But by then, they've already lost time. They've already missed momentum. And even when they move forward, it's from a place of pressure, not power. The ones who rise, the ones who separate, are not the ones who had more resources. They're the ones who made the move before they felt ready. They're the ones who chose courage when fear was louder. They're the ones who jumped without a guarantee. And because of that, they grew faster. They learned faster. They built character in the fire. Risk is not the enemy. Risk is the gateway. It's not the thing to avoid. It's the path to the very thing you say you want. Your goals live on the other side of risk. Your confidence, your clarity, your conviction, they are all forged in the moments you choose to act despite fear. But this isn't about taking every risk. It's about understanding why you avoid them. Because until you understand the root, you'll keep repeating the pattern. You'll keep circling around the same opportunity, talking yourself in and out of it until time makes the decision for you. This conversation isn't about pressure. It's about freedom. Because once you understand why people don't take risk, and once you learn to break that pattern, you don't just change your decisions, you change your identity. You become someone who moves, who decides, who leads, not just in the big moments, but in the daily ones. Because risk isn't something that shows up once a year. It's something you're confronted with in every small choice. And the person who gets comfortable with risk, who sees it clearly, who respects it but doesn't retreat from it, that person becomes unstoppable. Not because they never fail, but because they understand that failure is the cost of progress, and they are willing to pay it. People don't take risk because they're trained not to. It starts early, long before they know what risk even means. They are rewarded for compliance, for fitting in, for getting the answer right, for doing what they're told. They are punished for mistakes, for questioning, for stepping out of line, for coloring outside the lines. And little by little, they internalize a rule they never consciously agreed to: stay inside the lines. And you'll be safe. They learn to seek approval instead of progress. They learn that it's better to stay quiet than to say the wrong thing. That it's better to wait than to look foolish. That it's better to do what's expected than to do what feels right. And slowly they lose their tolerance for the unknown. They build their lives inside a cage of expectations, safe, predictable, risk-free. And then they grow up. They start chasing bigger things, goals, dreams, visions of a better life. But they're still carrying the rule book from before. The invisible fear that says, what if I fail? What if they laugh? What if I lose everything? And even though they can't always name it, they feel it. Every time they think about changing careers, every time they think about speaking up, every time they think about launching something new, they feel the tension between what they want and what they fear, between their potential and their programming. And most of the time, the programming wins, not because they're weak, but because it's familiar. Because playing small feels normal. Because they've spent their entire lives being rewarded for avoiding mistakes. That's why people don't take risks. Not because the risk is too great, but because their identity is too small. They still see themselves as someone who needs permission, someone who shouldn't rock the boat, someone who doesn't want to be seen failing. And until that identity changes, their behavior won't. You can't force yourself to take bold risks while holding on to a timid identity. You can't say, I want to lead, while still thinking like someone who needs approval. You can't act courageously when every decision is filtered through the question, what will they think of me? To take risk, you have to outgrow that mindset. You have to stop needing certainty. Stop waiting for permission. Stop believing that discomfort means you're doing something wrong. You have to shift from seeing fear as a stop sign to seeing it as a signal. Fear doesn't mean don't. It means pay attention. It means you're about to grow. It means you've reached an edge. And edges are where transformation happens. Not in the safe middle, not in the comfort zone, but at the edge, where you can't see the whole path, where your hands are shaking, where your next move feels like a gamble. And this is where most people freeze. They wait for the fear to go away, but fear doesn't disappear before the leap. It disappears after you jump, after you move, after you prove to yourself that you're still standing, still breathing, still here. That's the paradox. Confidence comes from doing the thing you're afraid of. Strength comes from stepping into the unknown. You don't get courage first. You earn it. You act, and then the courage shows up. You move, and then the belief kicks in. But that movement only happens when you stop lying to yourself, because the mind will come up with every excuse not to take the risk. Now's not the right time. I'm not ready. What if I fail? I just need to get a little more prepared. And all of that sounds reasonable, but it's not truth. It's fear in disguise. And fear is smart. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It uses logic. It wears the mask of caution. But its real goal is to keep you still, because motion is the death of fear. Risk is the death of safety. And safety, once it becomes your default setting, becomes a prison. So you have to get honest. You have to name the fear. You have to call it out. You have to ask, what am I really afraid of? What story am I telling myself? What lie have I accepted as fact? Because once you expose the lie, it loses power. Once you name the fear, you can work with it. And more often than not, the fear is rooted in perception, not reality. You're not afraid of the actual outcome. You're afraid of the feeling, the shame, the embarrassment, the rejection. But feelings aren't facts. They pass. And once you learn to feel them without letting them control you, the fear shrinks. That's when risk becomes something different. It's no longer something to avoid. It becomes something to chase. Not because you enjoy danger, but because you understand the relationship between risk and growth. You see that every level of your life is on the other side of a decision you've been avoiding. And once you make that decision, once you step through the fear, you start to change. You start becoming someone who can do things most people can't. Not because you're special, but because you were willing to act while others hesitated. You were willing to leap while others calculated. You were willing to go first. And that's what leaders do. They go first. They don't wait for the guarantee. They don't need a crowd behind them. They move. They act. And because of that, they earn the right to lead, not through titles, but through courage. Risk is a test of identity. It asks, who are you really? Are you someone who hides? Or are you someone who shows up? Are you someone who needs everything to be safe before you act? Or are you someone who trusts yourself to handle what happens next? That's the real question. And how you answer it determines everything else. People don't take risk because they overestimate the cost of failure and underestimate the cost of doing nothing. They imagine every worst-case scenario in vivid detail. The embarrassment, the judgment, the fallout. They build entire mental movies about how badly things could go. And the more they rehearse those scenes, the more real they feel. Fear feeds on imagination. But those same people rarely imagine what happens if they stay where they are. They don't think about what it will cost to stay stuck, to live another year inside the same problem, to spend another decade settling, to look back in 20 years and realize they never even tried. That cost is invisible. It's quiet. But it's far more painful than any failure they're afraid of. The truth is, most people are not avoiding risk. They're just choosing a different kind of risk. The slow risk, the risk of regret, the risk of potential never fulfilled. But because that risk isn't immediate, because it doesn't scream at them, they don't recognize it as danger. They call it comfort. They call it stability. But it's not. It's slow decay. And they pay for it in time, in energy, in restlessness, in that low hum of dissatisfaction that never goes away. Because a part of them knows they're made for more, but they're not doing anything about it. And that dissonance between what you're capable of and what you're doing, that's where anxiety lives. People think risk is scary, but there is nothing scarier than knowing you're capable of more and watching yourself do less. Nothing drains your spirit faster than watching yourself shrink. Not because you have to, but because you keep choosing to. That's the silent killer of potential. Not failure, hesitation. And that hesitation is not just a feeling, it's a habit. The more you do it, the more normal it becomes. You pause, you second guess, you wait, and your momentum dies. And then you think you're unmotivated. But you're not unmotivated. You're just overthinking, over-planning, overestimating the downside. The mind does this to protect you. But what it calls protection, your potential calls a cage. And if you let that pattern continue, you start playing smaller and smaller. Not because your goals changed, but because your threshold for risk shrank. Your comfort zone became your prison. So if you want to break out, you have to train yourself to see risk differently. You have to rewire your mind to recognize that doing nothing is not safe, that waiting is not neutral, that settling is not stability. You have to start seeing risk as a requirement, not a gamble. And you don't do that by diving into reckless chaos. You do it by stacking small wins, by proving to yourself that you can move without breaking, that you can leap without losing everything, that you can fail without falling apart. That's how you build trust in motion. Because you don't need to believe in yourself to start. You start, and then belief grows. You take the risk, and then confidence follows. That's the pattern. Risk first, growth second. You don't wait for confidence. You create it. That means starting small. What's one thing you've been putting off? One conversation, one decision, one move you've been rehearsing in your head but never acting on? Start there. Take the step. Don't try to figure out all 10 moves ahead. Just take the first one and then the next. And let the confidence grow from doing, not thinking. People say, what if it doesn't work? But what if it does? What if everything you want is on the other side of that single move? What if the thing you're afraid to do is the thing that will change your life? That's what risk is. It's the doorway to a version of you that you haven't met yet. And here's the thing. You've already taken risks before. You've already done hard things. You've already survived things you weren't sure you could handle. So what makes you think you can't do it again? What makes you think you're not strong enough now? You are more capable than your fear suggests. You are more resilient than your hesitation admits. You just have to remember who you are. And the best way to remember is to act. Action reminds you. Action reconnects you. Action rebuilds your belief. The people who succeed are not fearless. They just stopped letting fear make their decisions. They get scared. They feel doubt. But they move anyway. And that choice, again and again, is what separates them. Not talent, not timing, not luck, choice. So you need to choose right now. Are you going to keep waiting for a guarantee? Or are you going to bet on yourself? Are you going to keep asking, what if I fail? Or are you finally going to ask, what if I don't? That question changes everything. Because if you live your life avoiding every risk, you'll end up avoiding every opportunity. And that's not safety. That's regret. That's a future filled with what ifs instead of, I'm glad I did. You don't want that. You don't want to look back and realize you let fear pick your life for you. Another reason people don't take risk is because they confuse uncertainty with danger. They assume that if the outcome isn't guaranteed, it must be unsafe. If the path is unclear, it must be wrong. If they can't see every step, they shouldn't take the first one. They want certainty. They want control. But control is an illusion, and certainty is a lie the mind tells to avoid the unknown. Every breakthrough in your life, every defining moment, every stretch of growth, it all began with uncertainty. The unknown is not the enemy. It's the proving ground. It's the place where potential becomes reality. But it's also the place where your insecurities are loudest, where your fears flare up, where your excuses multiply. Because the unknown activates every part of you that wants to stay the same. And your ego hates uncertainty. It would rather be right and small than be wrong and expand. It would rather stay in control of a mediocre life than risk losing control to build a great one. That's why people hesitate. Not because the risk is wrong, but because they've attached their identity to their current reality. They don't just fear failing, they fear losing who they think they are. The job title, the social approval, the comfort of familiarity. They fear that if they let go of what they know, they won't recognize themselves anymore. And they're right, because growth requires ego death. Becoming someone new always requires releasing part of who you used to be. But that's the cost of progress. If you want to grow, something has to die. An old habit, an old belief, an old identity. That's what makes risk feel so heavy. It's not just the chance of failure, it's the reality of change. And change always comes with grief, even if it's a good change, even if it leads to something better. So if you're hesitating, ask yourself, what part of me am I afraid to let go of? What comfort am I still clinging to? What illusion of control am I still trying to protect? And what would happen if I stopped trying to control everything and just trusted myself to figure it out? Because that's the shift. When you stop needing certainty from the outside and start building confidence on the inside, you stop saying, I need to know it will work. And you start saying, whatever happens, I'll adapt. That's not recklessness. That's power. That's when risk becomes a tool, not a threat. When it becomes a mirror, not a monster. When you stop seeing risk as something that could destroy you and start seeing it as something that could define you. You don't need to eliminate fear to take risk. You need to reframe it, to see it as a sign that you're on the edge of something important. Because fear and risk always show up when you're stepping into something that matters, when you're about to make a move that requires more of you. But fear doesn't mean stop. It means pay attention. And fear doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. The question isn't, how do I get rid of fear? The question is, can I lead myself through it? Because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the presence of mission. And mission always trumps emotion. If your mission is clear enough, you'll move through the fear. You'll walk into the unknown. You'll take the risk. Not because you're fearless, but because what you're chasing is worth it. That's why you need more than just a goal. You need a reason, a vision, a standard, something that calls you forward. Because when the fear shows up, and it will, your reason has to be louder than your resistance. And that reason won't come from logic. It will come from truth. From knowing that you were not built to play small. That staying where you are is more dangerous than moving forward. That shrinking is the riskiest move of all. You need to stop asking, what's the risk if I go? And start asking, what's the cost if I stay? Because you already know what's behind you. You've already lived that life. You've already seen what happens when you hesitate. So, what are you really protecting? Your comfort, your pride, your image. None of those things will matter in the end. What will matter is whether or not you moved, whether or not you made the leap, whether or not you had the courage to bet on yourself when it counted. And that courage is not a feeling. It's a practice. It's something you build, one decision at a time, one risk at a time. You step out, you feel the fear, and you move anyway. And the more you do that, the more you train yourself to trust your ability to navigate the unknown. That trust is everything. Because once you trust yourself, you stop needing certainty. You stop needing to know the outcome in advance. You start believing that whatever happens, you'll handle it. You'll figure it out. You'll pivot. You'll rebuild. You'll grow. That's the mindset of the people who create extraordinary lives. They don't play it safe, they play it smart, but they're willing to look foolish, willing to fail, willing to lose a little now in order to gain everything later. And those losses, they're never wasted. Every risk, every fall, every mistake, it all becomes material. It sharpens your vision. It thickens your skin. It strengthens your character. It gives you the wisdom you can't get any other way. Because wisdom isn't found in books. It's found in risk, in motion, in experience, in the moments where you did it afraid, where you leapt before you had the plan, where you acted from conviction instead of comfort. That's where real confidence is born. People don't take risk because they've learned to associate risk with exposure. When you take a risk, you're visible, you're seen. And when you're seen, you can be judged, you can be criticized, you can be rejected. And for most people, that's the real fear. Not the risk itself, but the spotlight it puts on them. It's not the business idea that terrifies them. It's the fear of looking stupid if it fails. It's not the conversation they avoid. It's the fear of being misunderstood. It's not the leap that paralyzes them. It's the idea that someone might point and say, "See, I told you." That fear is powerful. It shapes decisions. It controls behavior. It teaches people to edit themselves, to shrink, to wait, to never stand out. Because standing out means standing alone. And standing alone is vulnerable. So they play small. They aim for reasonable. They make safe choices. They blend in. And then they wonder why their life feels muted. Why they're surrounded by people who don't inspire them. Why they keep starting over. It's not because they're not capable. It's because they're playing not to lose instead of playing to win. They don't want to risk rejection. They don't want to risk being laughed at. But rejection isn't the enemy. Rejection is a filter. It removes what's not aligned. It teaches you what's real. It clarifies your voice. It thickens your skin. And most importantly, it reminds you that your worth was never meant to be outsourced. You don't need universal approval to take a risk. You don't need unanimous support. You need courage. You need clarity. You need conviction. The people who have done the most in this world were not always popular when they started. They were misunderstood. They were mocked. They were told to be realistic. But they moved anyway. Because they understood something most people don't. Your critics are not your judges. They're just people with opinions. Opinions that are almost always shaped by their own fear, their own hesitation, their own need for safety. If you try to avoid criticism by staying small, you won't avoid pain. You'll just trade one kind of pain for another. The pain of risk is sharp but temporary. The pain of regret is slow but permanent. The pain of failure might sting, but the pain of never trying digs a deeper wound, one you carry in silence, one that never really heals because you never gave yourself the chance to find out what could have happened. This is why confidence matters, but not the loud kind, not arrogance, not fake certainty. The real kind of confidence is quiet. It's not about proving anything to anyone. It's about knowing that your vision, your values, your effort, they matter. Even if no one claps, even if no one gets it. Because the people who matter, the ones who are building, who are leading, who are creating, they respect risk takers. They see someone stepping into uncertainty and say, "That's someone I want to run with." But they can't see you if you're hiding. They can't support you if you're silent. They can't build with you if you never begin. And you have to be willing to begin badly, to try and fall, to speak and stumble. Because the myth that you need to be ready before you start is one of the greatest lies holding people back. Readiness is not a prerequisite. It's a result. It comes from repetition, from representatives, from stepping in before you feel prepared. You learn by doing. You build by trying. You grow by failing. And failure is feedback, not condemnation. You only fail permanently when you stop moving. Until then, you're still in the game. You're still building. You're still becoming. You have to stop rehearsing failure in your mind and start rehearsing follow-through. What would it look like to act from conviction instead of fear? What would it feel like to move without apology, to speak with clarity, to take the shot, not because you're sure, but because you're committed? That commitment is what changes your life, not the result. The decision, the clarity of saying, this is where I stand. This is what I want. This is what I'm willing to risk to build it. That's where real power begins. Not when you arrive, but when you stop needing permission to begin. And you'll have setbacks. You'll have critics. You'll have days where you question everything. But if your reason is deep enough, you'll keep going. And every time you do, you strengthen your voice. You sharpen your thinking. You clarify your message. You build resilience. You don't become a leader by playing it safe. You become a leader by acting in the face of fear and then doing it again and again until it becomes normal, until taking risks isn't something you resist. It's something you seek because you've learned to trust yourself in the process. You'll never reach your potential while living for other people's approval. You'll never build a legacy while playing defense. And you'll never become the person you're meant to be if you keep letting fear make your decisions. So don't wait until you feel ready. Don't wait until everyone understands. Don't wait until the outcome is guaranteed. Move now. Speak now. Decide now. Act now. Because now is all you really have. And every time you choose safety over stretch, you reinforce the lie that you're not capable, but you are. You've just forgotten what it feels like to move without a net. And that's the feeling you need to remember. People don't take risk because they think it's about outcome. They believe risk is only worth it if the result is certain, if success is guaranteed, if everything works out exactly as planned. And that belief keeps them stuck because deep down, they know no result is ever guaranteed. Life doesn't hand out promises. It hands out possibility, and possibility requires participation. If your willingness to take a risk is only based on the outcome, you'll never move. You'll be stuck in the loop of what if. You'll constantly try to outthink your fear. You'll try to solve problems that don't exist yet. You'll ask for more signs, more certainty, more reassurance. But life doesn't reward hesitation. It rewards boldness. The people who create change in the world are not the ones who knew they'd win. They're the ones who decided to play anyway. They committed before the result. They moved without the map. They knew the risk wasn't in the outcome. It was in missing the opportunity. Because the real value of risk isn't what you get. It's who you become. When you take a risk, you activate growth. You engage your courage. You stretch your skill. You confront your fear. You train yourself to step forward when it would be easier to sit still. And that habit of movement is what separates people who talk about transformation from the ones who live it. Taking risks consistently makes you someone who doesn't need perfect conditions to move. Someone who doesn't need consensus to make decisions. Someone who doesn't wait for approval or applause. Someone who lives from a place of alignment, not reaction. And that kind of person is rare, because the world teaches you to be safe, to be careful, to blend in. But your calling doesn't live in safety. Your future isn't built through caution. The biggest moments in your life will never come wrapped in guarantees. They'll come wrapped in fear. And you'll only access them if you move through it. So you have to start thinking differently. You have to stop asking, what if it doesn't work? And start asking, what's the cost if I don't try? You have to stop asking, what will people think? And start asking, what do I want to think of myself 5 years from now? Because your relationship with yourself is shaped by how often you honor your potential. Every time you ignore a calling, a pull, a gut instinct to move, you weaken that relationship. You erode your own trust. You tell yourself that comfort is more important than character. But when you take the risk, even if it doesn't work out, you build self-respect. You tell yourself, I don't need perfect conditions to honor my vision. You prove that you value growth more than validation. And that proof starts to change how you see yourself. Soon you stop thinking of yourself as someone who needs clarity to act. You start thinking of yourself as someone who creates clarity through action. You stop waiting for answers and start building them. You stop asking for a path and start forging one. And yes, it's messy. Yes, it's scary. Yes, it costs you something, but it also gives you everything. Not because the outcome is perfect, but because you become the kind of person who does what others won't. The kind of person who knows how to pivot, how to learn, how to evolve, how to endure. That's the real win. That's the hidden reward. The risk didn't make you weaker. It made you real. It broke your illusion of control. It stripped away what was fake. It showed you who you are when it's hard. And that's when you met the version of yourself that you'd been waiting for. But you only meet that version when you risk the comfort of who you used to be. When you risk being seen. When you risk getting it wrong. Because in that space, all of your potential is waiting. Not behind comfort, behind risk, behind movement, behind the action you keep talking yourself out of. So stop looking for the perfect time. It doesn't exist. Stop looking for guarantees. They won't come. Stop looking for certainty. It's a myth. You were never meant to move with complete clarity. You were meant to move with conviction. And conviction doesn't need all the answers. It just needs the next step. Take it, own it, don't look back. You might fall, you might fail, but you'll grow, you'll rise, you'll become. And that becoming, that evolution, that identity shift is the entire point. This entire time you've been asking yourself why people don't take risk. But now you see the real question, the one that matters most, is whether you will. Whether you will keep doing what's safe or start doing what's real. Whether you will keep living the story you've inherited or begin writing the one you were meant to live. Risk isn't the enemy. Stagnation is. The comfort zone doesn't keep you safe. It keeps you small. And the cost of staying small is greater than the cost of any failed leap, because you can recover from a failure. You can rebuild after a mistake, but you cannot recover time you never used. You cannot rebuild a future you never pursued. You've heard the voice that says, what if I'm not ready? What if I fail? What if they don't approve? But the truth is, you already know. You know what it feels like to hesitate. You know what it's cost you to wait. You know what it's like to live in your own shadow. And now, you know what's waiting on the other side. Clarity, strength, self-trust. Not because you have all the answers, but because you had the courage to move before they arrived. Because you chose to lead yourself, to bet on yourself, to answer the call instead of silencing it. This is not about being reckless, it's about being honest, about no longer pretending that what you have is all you want, about no longer calling fear wisdom and hesitation strategy. It's about doing the one thing most people never do, making the move without the guarantee. And that's the moment everything changes. Not when the world tells you it's time, when you decide it is. That one decision to take the risk, to speak the truth, to leave the comfort, to try the thing, to become the person. That's the moment your future begins. So if you're still asking why people don't take risk, maybe it's time to stop asking and start leading, not later. Now, because the only thing between you and the life you want is the courage to take the next step without waiting for certainty.